Who is in attendance today, and I want to thank my fellow colleagues, our legislative members, the audience, as well as the governor and his team for being here today. And what we wanted to do was talk a little bit about our transportation and transportation infrastructure needs and the growth of our economy and the issues that we're facing as a state and what it is that we need to do to make sure that we invest properly in our infrastructure. So as we've been moving forward in our Transportation Committee, myself along with my co-chairman, Representative Lamont, and members of our Transportation Committee and other folks, we've had a few public hearings. There's several bills that are out there in reference to tolling for providing much needed revenues for our infrastructure. There are other ideas as well. And the goal of the Transportation Committee was to make sure that we had a fully vetted public hearing to discuss all the issues that were brought forward, trying to craft legislation that took into all the comments, concerns, and issues that are in regards to transportation and how we should fund the infrastructure going forward. Obviously, the Democrats, we have a tolling proposal out there so that we can have a dedicated revenue stream, find the funding that is necessary for long neglected issues that the state has been facing. The committee has come up with 3 different versions of a bill for tolling. Within those different versions are different ideas. Our goal as a committee is to make sure that we can start to narrow down all the issues that we agree on, negotiate the things we still are currently working on to finally have a finished product so that we can fully vet that on the floor of the House and the Senate for the hopeful eventual passage by our governor. So many voices still need to weigh in on what we need to do. There are still concerns out there, so we are still working in progress, but we're doing it in a way that we are trying to address everything that's necessary. One of the things that I think we can all agree on is that doing nothing is not an option. We all agree that our roads and our infrastructure, our rails and our buses need the proper investments. Where there is disagreement is how we do that. But that shouldn't stop us from moving forward. And the growth of our economy and the infrastructure that contributes to the growth of that economy is too important for us to not address the issues that the state faces. So it's with that we are here today to make sure that we continue this conversation, that we put a fine point. It's not on one issue that tolls is the only answer. This is about a bigger picture. How do we grow the state of Connecticut? How do we make sure that we have proper funding, not just for our infrastructure, but we have proper funding in our other obligations in the general fund, and we don't crowd out funding that's necessary there for all the other issues that the state of Connecticut has to address. So we're trying to be thoughtful. We're trying to address everyone's concerns. I'm sure there's going to be some disagreement along the way, but that shouldn't stop us from trying to do what is right from a policy perspective for the state of Connecticut. So our hope is to do just that, to continue this conversation, try and craft legislation that we can all agree on. We want something that we can do for the benefit of our state. We want the House to be supportive. We want the Senate to be supportive. And of course, importantly, we want our governor to be supportive so that we give him the tools to make sure that he and all of us can be successful going forward. So let me stop it there for a moment just to give my co-chair a chance to weigh in. And again, I want to thank all our members that are here. And then we'll open it up for a few questions after a few of the speakers finish up. With that.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming out today. And we have this great moment where we can say something positive. Republicans and Democrats all agree that Connecticut's transportation infrastructure needs significant investment. We saw that through the committee process in which scores of bills were introduced by Republicans and Democrats alike, talking about the investments we need to make in rail, roads, and bridges. We saw that with the release, finally, of Prioritized Progress. The transportation plan that the Republicans have been talking about for months was finally drafted a couple weeks ago and was released, and folks have been talking about it. And in that, they recognize the $30 to $60 billion worth of transportation infrastructure needs that need to happen in the state of Connecticut. So we know that it needs to happen. We all agree that investment in transportation is core to our economic future and our state's full potential. And that's about where we end the agreements, and we quickly move into how we pay for it. So if we all agree that it needs to happen, the question then becomes, how do we smartly pay for it? The proposal that we were working on between the House, the Senate, and the governor's office would have a dedicated transportation revenue stream. with probably $800 million per year put specifically into the types of projects that will grow our state. Now, what does the Republican Prioritized Progress Plan do? It shortchanges literally every aspect of state government. It would crowd out school construction funds. It would crowd out brownfield remediation and economic development. It would crowd out clean water investments. And we barely have enough to make the smart investments we need to make over the next couple of years. When we talk about tolling, we're not talking about something we all want to do because we need to pay the bills. We're talking about the future of our state, how we alleviate congestion on our roadways, how do we provide world-class transit options to our commuters and our businesses. When we talk to chambers of commerce and local business owners, this is the issue they talk about, how smart transit investment makes our state grow. We all agree on that one point. So if we can agree on that, then we have to just start talking about how we fund it. And Prioritized Progress is probably the least responsible economic development plan you can possibly imagine. It's about $10.5 trillion in deficit when you add up all of the authorizations inherent in that bill. There's no guarantee that any of those projects will ever happen because it will crowd out every other bonding aspect, and you'll be forced to fight out every issue, every bridge in this legislature, and balance it against every other priority that we have as a state. There's a more responsible way to do this. Allowing 40% of our transportation infrastructure costs to be paid for by out-of-state residents who are driving on our roads every day is the right choice for paying for our needs. The future is going to happen. It's going to have to be paid for. The tolling proposals before us, for the first time, allow us to make the necessary investments we need and have out-of-state residents pay their fair share. So I'm proud and excited to work with the governor and the Senate as our House representative to make sure we have a proposal that the general public can feel is sound, smart, it's protected, and makes the strategic investments we need. Thank you all. And Mr. Governor.
Hello, everybody. Legislators, hey, we worked really hard on those graphics there, by the way. We don't need them. And Carlo and Roland, let me just start where you left off. I got elected, started serving about 90 days ago. I said I was going to bring people together. And I think on this issue, you now see how important bringing our transportation system into the 21st century is. The Republicans have a plan. The Democrats have a plan. Labor and business are on board with this. Young people trying to figure out whether they want to make Connecticut their home. They know that this is key to the economic future of the state, is getting our transportation system fixed. That's public transportation, roads, bridges. And you see this reflected not just a prioritized borrowing plan, but also in terms of the 3 bills that are coming out of the Transportation Committee. And that shows you the energy we have behind that. And there's some things we're going to do this as we bring these 3 bills together. There's one of these bills, I guess, has something about these things are going to be automatically agreed to in 15 days if there's not a vote. That's not going to happen. This is something I want each and every one of you on board with. I want this fully deliberated in the legislature. I want us to go forward arm in arm, knowing how important this is and how we have to pay for this in an honest way. Our bills have other things in common. I know we have said very clearly that there will not be more than 50 gantries. And that's important because, there's measles outbreaks all over the country right now. And I've also seen something called the measles map, which maybe some of you have seen in these anti-tolling rallies that have just hundreds of little red dots, like there's going to be a gantry at the end of every street corner. And that's false. That's false advertising. No more than 50 gantries, and not more than the 4 major throughways that we've identified. That's 95, 91, 84, and the Merritt. And I think that should be clear in terms of what the parameters are. We've got some preliminary ideas out there, say 4.4 cents a mile, gantries maybe every 6 or 7 miles. That's all subject to negotiation. I need people to sit down with me as we go forward with this. What it raises is approximately $800 million a year. $800 million that Joe Giletti and the Department of Transportation have pointed out is key to keeping our special transportation fund solvent and, more importantly, having the revenues we need to get our transportation system into the 21st century. And it's a matter of 30, 30, 30. But let me give you some examples of what we have to do and how I can leverage that $800 million. We can leverage that, by some bonding over and above the tolling revenues we have. We can do that by finding private partners to team with on this. I was just down in Washington, D.C., and John Larson introduced me, the head of Ways and Means Committee, and he said, Governor, get ready. We're going to have a transportation bill. It's going to represent $1 to $2 trillion over a period of time, and maybe Connecticut should think about getting in the front of the line there, making sure you have your projects designed and ready to go, and make sure you have a revenue stream so you can do your 20% match or whatever is required to do that. And Joe Giletti's on that right now, already putting together the plans we need so we can hit the ground running and take advantage of this extraordinary opportunity we have to get our system moving again. So what are some of the priorities we've got? I've got some of my friends here from Fairfield County. I was just down there talking to a business leader. He says, you've got to fix I-95. If you can't fix I-95, I can't stay because I can't get my people to and from work. And Joe has a very specific plan on how we could do that on I-95, how we can fix the exit ramp at in Bridgeport heading north, how we fix the exit ramp in Stamford going south, how we take care of those major bottlenecks that slow up traffic dramatically there, which is killing commerce in that part of the state. And, we do that along with congestion pricing. You can make an enormous difference on that artery, which is so key to economic development throughout. You go further afield. You go to Waterbury. You've seen the Mixmaster. Some of us were there on a really snowy day talking about what it means to fix the Mixmaster. It's a question of public safety. These are old infrastructure, which is we're keeping an eye on it. We're fixing it as patch, costing us tens of millions of dollars, by the way. As Roland said, it ain't broke, don't fix it. Everybody agrees that's not a strategy, and just trying to patch through is not working right now. Going further down the field, you got the viaduct right here in Hartford. What we could do there, you see those X's on the side of the viaduct? That means those are things that are structurally, deficient. Joe's on top of it. We are fixing this. Again, spending tens of millions of dollars to keep the viaduct going and safe. But that's no way to do this going forward. And frankly, if we could get a revised viaduct, we do some things that are sub-level. We could open up the river. We could open up a Dunkin' Donuts. We could really be transformative for the city of Hartford. Further afield, some of us were at the Gold Star Bridge, New London, a month or so ago. And we were told, don't park underneath the bridge right here because the concrete is coming down. Okay, you've got an idea of why this is such a priority from a public safety point of view and from a development point of view. And by the way, this tolling revenue, which we use by law, has to be specific to keeping our roads in bridges in good repair, starting with those 4 major thoroughfares, does free up some other transportation money we can use to fix our rail. It's just outrageous that it takes 10, 15 minutes longer to get from New Haven to New York than it did just 20 years ago. I hear about that wherever I go, talking to the business community. If we can speed that up, and Joe has given us an idea, within the next 5 years, we could speed it up 5, 10 minutes. That makes a dramatic difference in terms of people commuting in, people commuting out, what that does in opening up that orbit. How about the Waterbury line? How about the Shoreline East line? We need new rail service there so we can open up those arteries as well, just like we opened up to Hartford. These are the types of priorities that would be in our transportation plan, so key to getting our state growing again. So how do you pay for it? I know we have 2 major ideas on the table now. One is the prioritized bonding idea. And look, I love people to come forward with ideas. So I salute the Republicans for coming forward with this, but I think it's the wrong way to go. I think it's the wrong way to go because we bond too much in our general fund. We are borrowing too much. We're putting too much on our credit card already. We have paid a price for that. And to double down on that, do even more borrowing, putting those costs onto our kids is just the type of thing that would be, I think, devastating to our bond rating and devastating to our fiscal equilibrium. Look, we had a pretty good week last week when it comes to that. The credit rating agencies, you probably saw, they said, look, the economic outlook, the outlook for the state of Connecticut has gone from neutral to positive. You know, that hasn't happened in 18 years. We did that because we showed them we were serious about getting our fixed costs under control, and that included bringing down our appetite for bonds. We called it a debt diet, bringing it down from 1.6 to under $1 billion over a period of time. They said how important that is. You know, last week we did a bond offering reflecting that. It was a raging success. What does a raging success mean? It means it saves each and every one of you, the state of Connecticut, over $50 million. Over $50 million a year. That's what our fiscal discipline means in terms of the marketplace out there. And I got to say, if you just think we're going to load on another $700 million a year in bonding on the general fund, that takes us in the exact wrong direction. And by the way, that bonding, as the note over there says, that's about $600 million a year you'd be paying on interest on that in the out years. And it's worth remembering, out-of-staters don't help you with that. Out-of-staters won't pay 40% of that. You and your kids will pay 100% of that. It's the wrong way to go. So we've come forward with our plan that calls for electronic tolling. And let me address some of the issues, because I've heard them. I talked about, the measle map, and I've tried to be very clear about how we do these gantries, how few they are, what we can do about them, where they would go. We can talk about that. I've heard it's going to take 6, 7 years before you can get these gantries up. And what do we do in the meantime? That's nonsense. I was down, I talked to Elaine Chao, she's Secretary of Transportation, and she gave me a great deal of confidence that she would be able to accelerate the approval process for us to get the gantries up in less than half that amount of time. Okay, that's still not good enough. That's still, say, 2, 3 years away. You know, what do we do in the meantime? Once we get approval to get these gantries up, once they know that we're going to be able to do our electronic tolling, we can borrow against those anticipated tolling revenues. What that means is, with burdening our general obligation bonds, doing it over on the transportation fund, we can get money now to start putting into transportation to accelerate over and above what Joe has done in terms of the maintenance budget that we have in place that keeps our system safe. The tolling, as I pointed out, it's worth noting that 40%, that's $320 million a year comes from out-of-staters. And I'm happy to subsidize Andrew Cuomo. I'm not really happy about it, but I do subsidize Andrew Cuomo's roads and Charlie Baker's, and it's time for them to help contribute as well. These are all reasons that this is so important. The other big objection I hear, and this one really rings true to me more than anything else, well, 2 things. One, just cost. Connecticut, can you deliver this stuff, on budget at a reasonable price? We're sort of doubtful. I hear you spend more per administrative mile than anybody else, and Joe has pointed out to me, don't believe these nonsense studies. They're comparing our 4-lane, 8-lane, 7-lane highways with, single-lane roads. So you can't compare this. But more importantly, we got to do a better job of holding down our costs and giving you, the taxpayers, confidence that your money is being well spent. And, I was just down, in Stamford. We saw the bridge that's being replaced over I-95 down there. And I was remarked, they assemble the entire bridge off-site. What that means is 2 things. Where in the old days, you would have had to rebuild the bridge, over the I-95. It would have taken a year of shutting down that bridge. Now they're going to replace that bridge in 2 weekends, north side and then the south side in consecutive weekends. And the project manager said, this project would have cost us twice as much money just a generation ago. So I know you're skeptical about government, but I want you to believe that we've got the team in place to make sure we're doing this as efficiently as we can. And by the way, I'd like the opportunity for the private sector to step in on this as well. There's a possibility that we use P3s, public-private, to do this as well, where they take the financial risk. So I've got to give you confidence in terms of how your money is being spent and what it means to the future of the state of Connecticut. One last objection, which I think is the truest of the objections, and that is that we are a state that we have a middle class that's gotten slammed over a generation now. And they're paying a lot of money, and they feel like folks are falling behind. And come on, Gov. I know we got to fix the transportation. I know borrowing is not the way to do it, but I don't know how I can afford to do that. And that is the one thing that rings with me. And I've got to sit down with folks and find a fair way to do this. I've talked about maximum discounts for Connecticut Easy Pass. We talked about frequent user discounts. I'm talking to the transportation about maybe we can find, once we get the tolling revenues in place, we can make bus service free during off-peak hours. There's a way that perhaps that we can eliminate the car tax. All ways that give you some sense of confidence that I know that this is a sacrifice. And it's really easy to be against, something that asks people to sacrifice. But it's that important to me. And I'll just leave you with, a lot of people say, Gov, why are you putting so much of your political capital here? It's not going to be very popular. You're asking people to do more. They're already doing a heck of a lot. And I just got to tell you, I can't think of anything more important for the future of this state than to, A, get our transportation system upgraded and do it in a fiscally responsible way. And I haven't heard any other alternatives that make a dime's worth of sense. And you give me the privilege of being your governor, and I'm going to do everything I can. I'm not going to leave anything in the battlefield to make sure we get this state moving again, have you confidence in the state and confident that we have a budget that's, is getting the job done. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you all. And what do we do next?
Thank you, Denise.
The foundation of your program is, as far as how the feds would approve it, is it has to deal with congestion pricing. So in the chart you just gave us, or your administration did, there's a 40-cent differential for a trip to Stamford and Haven. Do you have any assurances from the feds that this is enough of a difference to actually move commuter behavior, to get people to basically expand rush hour, to have them go earlier or later?
What I have assurance from the feds is that they want to work with us. Whatever else you think has happened in Washington, D.C., they're pretty flexible and they're pretty aggressive about letting states take some innovative new ideas. I think maybe Joe would be better able to speak in terms of the effects of the congestion pricing and how many of those trucks would go not at peak hours but at off-peak hours, how many cars would reroute. But, one thing I have learned is that I only need 5% or 10% to make an enormous difference in traffic flow. It's not like I need 50% of the cars off to go 50% faster. That's not the way the algorithm works. So I think it would make a real difference.
Can you or the commissioner perhaps explain to us the chart that was handed out is for frequent in-state users, I presume, and with a 50% discount, we presume, Senator Carlo seemed to confirm this, that out-of-state transponders would be double those amounts. What would the truckers pay? They pay by axle, do they not? Would it be 4 times more, 5 times more? Can you give us a handle on that, please?
You've heard the governor say that we're actually working that out, and we do have to get approval with the federal government on this as we're looking at it as well. But you are correct when you use a term like 4 times, all right? Because that is approximately the differential in the wear that goes on when a truck goes across the highway versus the cars going across the highway. And the tolls will be reflective of that as we come forward with the pricing on it, because it is going to be more expensive. We're looking at 2 classifications in the trucks, and we're hoping to get that through as well. But for me to give you specifics on it before we get this approval with the federal government would be wrong, but you are in the right ballpark when you say that.
Passenger cars would be double if they had an out-of-state transponder to that truck, correct? If in-staters are getting a 50% discount.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
That people with out-of-state transponders,
Yes.
For example, I'm from New York. I have a New York transponder. I cross the border into Connecticut. I pay double what's on that sheet going from Stamford to New Haven. Is that right?
Yeah, we're looking at about a 50%.
Yeah.
Well, no, let me correct that, because what we're saying is it would be a 50% reduction if you are a regular commuter, okay? There's a 30% reduction that we're looking at for a Connecticut resident, and another 20% if you are a regular commuter on it. So that would be the difference. So you're again, you're close to saying it correctly, but we're dealing right now in looking at it from the standpoint of what we're projecting and what we're saying to the federal government is what we can put out there that will cause this type of mitigation for the traffic.
For the average commuter, is it going to be a 50% discount? Because previously, I think when you spoke to appropriations, it was going to be 30% for the average Connecticut resident and an additional 20 on top of that. So is that when it says average of 50, is that what you're referring to?
And the answer to that is yes, we were looking at it from the standpoint that 30% would be the standard across the board and an additional 20% for those people that are using it on a regular basis so that they would get the 50% off.
What is it that would stop the state from just gouging out-of-state drivers? Charge them like 300% more than Connecticut residents.
It's the same argument. Do we want to have that same thing going on with other states? Okay, when we're going across into their borders. No, why not? Because think about it. All right, right now we need a partnership with New York. We need a partnership with Rhode Island. We need a partnership with Massachusetts as we're looking at our rail systems and our roads. So it's a matter right now of fairness, and what we've looked at is the same type of fairness that's been applied in these other states being applied here.
I'd only add, Max, on that as Joe said, I got to work with Charlie Baker. I got to work with Gina Raimondo. I got to work with Andrew Cuomo. And we're going to work collaboratively on this. They all have their tolling systems in place, and we're going to be in step. We've got a lot of flexibility in terms of the pricing. We've got a lot of flexibility into the discounts. But how I get along with my neighbors is going to be key to that final decision.
Would it be also possible, as it is in Massachusetts, for a Connecticut resident, for example, can get a Massachusetts transponder if they commute on the Massachusetts?
Yeah, I think that's not only true, but the law. Yeah, Chris.
So what is the timing of this? Like, does the federal government have to approve this proposal? I know the three bills in transportation would be wrapped into one bill, and so how do we coordinate the scans?
My understanding is once we get approval from the legislature, they know we're going ahead. At that point, we go back to the Secretary of Transportation in Washington, D.C., and get the waivers we need to move ahead. And I'm told personally by her that we can hopefully do that on an expedited basis.
Okay, but how will the approval, because obviously you're going to work these things out. So, if you vote to authorize the DOT to prepare a tolling plan, what happens next? Will the DOT have to come back and get approval from the legislature to then submit that plan? Or, if a plan is submitted and then approved by the feds, would it have to come back for a final vote in the legislature? Just exactly how do you guys envision?
I sure hope not. I mean, this is a lot of work getting this first vote done, to tell you the truth. And I'd like to think we got a really good DOT. We've laid out the parameters. We've said how many gantries there are going to be, what roads they'll be on, or certainly what they won't be on. And then I would allow the experts to work on this. But, I got some heads of transportation around me. Maybe they have a different point of view.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at. There's some significant differences between your three bills that have to be worked out. And one of them you just said.
It's going to be one bill. We're going to work together on this, and we're going to have that ironed out very soon.
This automatic deemed approval language, and it seems that's not going anywhere.
That's not going anywhere. That's not democracy.
Governor, I hear from a lot of people that they're concerned that the price, there's no guarantee it won't go up. And if they agree to 4.5 cents now, what's to say that in a few years from now that you won't raise it? What do you say to them?
I say I won't raise it more, period. But more importantly, come to the table, Republicans. Come to the table. If you have concerns that we're going to, use this as a slippery slope, say we need a 2/3. We need a supermajority. You can only raise it if something happens. I mean, I'm all ears, and I understand the concern that what people say. But I think we can address that through a tough language in our law.
Governor, can I go back and prioritize progress for a minute?
Yeah.
The Republicans want to take about $600 or $700 million a year, from geo bonding and move it over. Can coincidentally, that's about the same amount of bonding that you would like to stop seeing authorized in your debt diet. You heard from Representative Lamont that the Republicans' proposal would crowd out every other bonding aspect. And it's going to choke off school construction, clean water projects. How convinced are you the Democrats standing around you are going to support your debt diet, which based on math would do the exact same thing that, Representative Lamar says prioritize progress would do?
Well, first of all, I tell you that everybody stood up and cheered when I said we have to go on a debt diet. That was one of the few bipartisan things we had. So I think we've got to stick to that. And you heard from the rating agencies how key that is to their look at the state of Connecticut. So let me just finish, though. So now I got to see what the prioritized progress deal is. I mean, is it going to be $700 million over and above what we're currently doing? Or are they going to skinny down and force out schools, force out water, like Roland was saying? I don't have a sense of that, but both are bad options. Once we either we're putting more and more on our credit card, which everybody knows is the exact same addiction that got us into this problem over the last generation, or we're shortchanging everything else that's so key to economic growth.
Bond authorizations, and we have plenty of authorized bonding and allocated bonding that's never been issued, but both eventually stop the bonding from going in.
Here's my bonding expert.
Okay.
It's an excellent question, and look, as the governor has indicated, the plan that he's put forward starts with right-sizing expectations on authorizations, right? And so therefore what you're seeing is $1.6 billion on average authorizations being scaled down to about $1 billion. But in any event, to implement the debt diet, we need to control what actually gets allocated. And under this fine governor, we are going to do exactly what he's indicated, and that is prioritize allocations. We will continue to support school construction. We will continue to have the clean energy improvements. We will continue to support housing. It will be more restricted. But what we are not going to do that differs from the prioritized progress or bonding is that we are not going to slap an additional $700 million on average per year into the general fund, the debt service of which our governor has already indicated by 2029 is $600 million, and our taxpayers are going to pay 100% of the cost. Our governor and these leaders here today want to make sure that those investments can be made, and they're made in a way where they're 40% subsidized by out-of-state drivers that contribute to the deterioration of our infrastructure. I do not. I do not. We have a solid plan. We believe that it can be sustained, and we believe that the priorities will be met.
How solid, Governor, how solid are these numbers that you handed us out on this piece of paper here? How solid are these numbers on the actual cost, and will these numbers be in the bill so that they can't be changed later? Will the legislature vote on these exact toll rates that you've handed to us here?
Well, that's a good question. I want people to the table. You know, we've got flexibility. We put in 4.4 cents. We put in, 6 to 7, every 6 to 7 miles. I'm happy to negotiate this. If there are ways that you have that make this more palatable, make this more acceptable. But as I said in my budget address going back a couple of months, I'm all ears. The door is open. It's a big table, but the numbers have to add up. Let me see. Did you want something to add there?
Yes, Governor.
Well.
On the question about the bonding, the toll revenues would go directly into STF. They would go directly into the lockbox. Those would be dedicated revenue streams for future revenue bonds for transportation. They would not be general obligation bonds. It would be the bonds that would be crowded out for school construction, economic development, and so forth. So you would have a dedicated revenue stream for transportation, not GO bonds, which then crowds out those other issues. It's also a topic that we've discussed with the markets, with the Treasury Department, to say, does this plan hold water out in the public sector for when you have to reissue bonds in the future? And the reply back is that is one of the better models when you have a dedicated revenue stream for a guaranteed fund for infrastructure, and it's not crowding out or impinging on what general obligations need to do, which covers all the other issues that's important to the state. So this would be a dedicated revenue stream, guaranteed. Our hope in the legislature is to craft a language so that the language specifically states this. It shows that the money is coming in, where it's going, what it's going to pay for, and that it can't be diverted. And for the fact that we've issued a lockbox amendment constitutionally, it adds even more emphasis. And we also want to include language that the federal government says we must do or cannot do, so that we can make sure that we garner the trust that the public deserves. So we want to be as clear as possible with the language to the extent that we can. We will rely on the experts with DOT and the rates that are potentially could be proposed, but that would be the plan going forward. The feds would have to authorize it, and then it would come back to us where we could still weigh in on it if need be.
Yeah,
That's
I
good.
was
Thank
asking
you.
about the bill because there's been some complaints about some other non-legislative transportation authority changing the rates, increasing the rates, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I was asking, is it specifically going to be in the bill so that the legislators themselves vote on the toll rates? And I think if I heard you
I
correctly,
think you heard.
you're saying you have no problem with that.
Before we wrap up, would anybody else like to say anything before we scoot out of here?
Yes, I would. Whatever happens.
Well, hold it. I know you would.
You mentioned securitization. So is securitization a done deal, or is that still subject to negotiation in the overall bill?
You know me, I'm happy to talk about that with anybody. I think you'd be absolutely crazy not to take some of that money up front and put that to transportation until we get the tolling done. People have been concerned what happens over the next 2 years. Well, that's one of the answers. Real money up front, not secured against the taxpayers, secured against the users of our highways. Everybody, thank you very much. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Now we get to work.
I don't know.
Get him. I will. Better head him out the other way. Yeah, maybe that's.
Stand by, New Haven. Keep rolling. The Republicans are going to be addressing us shortly. Stand by, please, New Haven.
A lot of work. You got to change the batteries?
Yeah. The Democrats talk too much. They wear my batteries out. You guys would never do that.
Yeah,
Get right to the point.
Is this our paper? From mine, I should say. This is from when I began with tolling way back early on. I didn't want City Smith reports. I read everything.
Oh, that's not great.
Try to give respect to the government. Not always clear the hall. Not take up my space.
That's right. I know.
She's the press person. I forget her name. Chris is still trying to get the ZZ Pass there.
No, I don't know the
Stand quiet. Quiet, please.
So we just wanted to comment with respect to the press conference relative to prioritized progress. I think we all agree infrastructure is a must, but I think it speaks to the tone deafness that the governor's office has had relative to those people who have come out in significant numbers to say that tolls is not needed in Connecticut. But a couple of things that we heard today was, one, there is no plan. There is no idea of how much they're going to charge, who they're going to charge, what the rate is per mile, what they're going to do for out-of-staters, in-staters, trucks, etc. There is no plan. And what you also heard is that their preference is to pass a bill to give them absolute authority to do a toll and then let the bureaucrats determine how our constituency is going to get priced. We're going to have no part of it. They are going to determine how much they're going to charge without one legislator weighing in. How disrespectful could you be to the people of the state of Connecticut by saying, give us the authority and then we'll tell you how much? And there isn't a darn thing you could do about it. That is simply outrageous. Outrageous. This should have pure transparency. If it goes through, at the very least, have the courage and the respect for the people of the state of Connecticut and bring forth a plan that shows a formula and allows people to vote who represent the people who are going to be taxed. This is crazy, crazy way of doing it. And what you saw was a full endorsement. And the reason is because they know when the real numbers come out and the real hard study is done, this fictitious model they have on the back here is nothing but a cartoon sketch at best. Secondly, you heard them talk about borrowing. The truth of the matter is we're under our cap. The governor suggested we may not be. He didn't know, so let's clarify the record. We are under our cap. That's number one. Number two is he doesn't like our borrowing, but he likes his borrowing, because what he said was that he's going to take that toll money and leverage it for dollars. So he's going to borrow. Now it's just a question of which borrowing plan makes sense, not that we're not going to borrow. So I think there are other people who want to speak besides me on this. Also, I object to the notion. Obviously, those folks who said we're not bonding for clean water funds haven't read our prioritized progress. We are. Those people who said we're not borrowing for school construction haven't read our prioritized progress. We are. Those people who said we haven't, we're not bonding for LoSiP. We are. Town Road Aid. We are. You know why? Because they haven't read the document. They're sticking to talking points that were created 2 years ago that they haven't read the document, and it's the same talking point. Knowledge is power, and sometimes knowledge could be scary. So you ignore it, you don't have to deal with the reality of the argument for which you face. All you do is go to simple talking points. That, to me, is an embarrassment to this institution. That is a falsehood to say we're not borrowing for these items under our geo bonding, which is what we have in place. The governor talked about the partnership, private-public partnership, the three-point partnership. Fails to mention it was the Democrats who said no, and in GAE destroyed any hopes of that bill being of any value to the governor. So he's boxing himself in. We have no knowledge of a plan. And this is just a desperate attempt to try to get a toll plan which has failed, which is going to fail this state and failed in the way it's rolled out, back on track. And simply doesn't do it. Vinny?
I think Senator Fasano said it best. You know, the legislature isn't fooled. The Republicans in the legislature are not fooled by this proposal. And the problem is now neither is the public. When you go out, the public is scared, they're concerned. They don't know what level of taxation is going to occur now just getting into your vehicle to drive to work. And that impacts our middle class, along with so many other budget proposals that Governor Lamont has put forth. And so that fear is real, and the public is coming back, pushing back on this plan. And unfortunately, what we saw here today is an attempt of Governor Lamont and some of the legislative Democrats to come forward and continue to peddle something that has no specifics, as Senator Fasano pointed out. We don't know the level of tolling. We don't know the number of tolling, but we're told to accept it and jam it down the state of Connecticut's throats. And I'd like to give Laura Devlin a few words as well.
Thank you. So we just heard the governor say that he wants to gain the trust of taxpayers in Connecticut. Yet this is the same governor that 2 months being in office raided the Special Transportation Fund by freezing the GO bonds that were allocated and this car tax that was also allocated through the bipartisan budget. We just heard that there really is no plan, but whatever that plan turns out to be, the legislature won't have any part of it. And it was a total mischaracterization of the prioritized progress plan. And that's why we are getting hundreds of people each night to come to the informational toll forums that Senator Martin and I are holding across the state. Because the residents of Connecticut have had it. And they want the straight story, the straight facts, and that's what we're providing them. We can do better. Our state deserves a lot better. Thank you.
Thank you. Listen, our plan is on the table. We're showing it to you. Today, I didn't see their plan. You guys started to ask some pretty serious questions and started to get into the weeds a little bit, and I saw them close up this shop pretty quickly. So I would suggest to you to go dig some more and go ask some pointed questions to them.
Any questions?
Is there any plan, however detailed it would be, that would cause any of you standing here to seriously consider tolling in any way, shape, form, or price point?
That's an open-ended question. Look, I believe that all ideas should be brought to a table, no matter what the ideas are. And we have looked at this tolling going back to the 2009 first tolling study done in the state of Connecticut. And I've read every single report, and I know everybody else has behind me, right up through. And as I said, the last press conference, we're going to be issuing a statement relative to the Smith report, which we're finalizing, we'll be issuing tomorrow. But the numbers don't work. And you can't, they keep on saying Massachusetts. Massachusetts has a different set of rules that they abide by. New York has a different set of rules that they abide by. Rhode Island has a different set of rules they abide by because we are a unique state with the 1983 agreement. We're very limited of what we can and cannot do, and that was done intentionally by that agreement. So they haven't, if they submit a plan, I'd be happy to review it, but I haven't seen anything that says it's viable and it works. The underlying fear is the tax monster, which is the toll tax monster. That still, sends goosebumps when I hear them talk about it because you see what he's already done, which is to move the transportation funds coming from other sources out.
But when you say viable,
Yep.
now there's an open question as to whether or not what they're talking about will produce the numbers that they hope to get. But the Federal Highway Administration has been very clear that it is permissible for Connecticut to go forward with some form of congestion tolling. So the question is, will it produce 800 million, 600 million, so forth. But the point of my first question was, there is a sense that tolls are a great wedge issue for the Republicans 2 years out, and that there's no way you're going to have a serious discussion about tolls in any form. And I haven't heard anything here. Go ahead.
So let me reject a couple of things. First of all, how did Connecticut end up in tolls? The reason why Connecticut ended up in tolls is several years ago, Commissioner Redeker, under Governor Malloy, applied for a VPP, which is value pricing pilot program, and several slots were given out. Connecticut got one of the slots. And then they have a time period in which they have to enact their tolling plan with the approval of feds that has to be congestion. That's how we are where we are. With respect to saying this is a wedge issue, I want to also be clear that when tolls was just a mirage 5 years ago, the Republicans had prioritized progress on the table 5 years ago. Before tolling became no one in this building had any legs in this building. We said, let's get the STF going by prioritized progress. But because it was a Republican idea, no one paid attention to it. And the only way we got it in our budget 2 years ago is we were 18-18 in the Senate and close in the House. But we started this conversation long before tolls ever had any way. So it wasn't like they went out and did tolls. We said, what can we do as a political wedge issue that's hurtful to us who worked years on this? What we said was, how are we going to move Connecticut forward? What's the best way of changing this transportation fund, which was going broke when we were looking at it 5 years ago? We saw that it wasn't the sale of gasoline that was going down. It was the cost of gasoline that was going down, the wholesale cost. That's the reason why our money was being lost. And then you had bonding going up. The governor was doing the ramp up. The question is, to us, how do you solve that problem? We came up with, collectively, House and Senate, prioritized progress. That's how we ended up here. It wasn't a wedge issue. So we felt we had the right issue at the time. Now they brought on tolls for whatever reason they wanted to bring on tolls. We looked at that open-eyed and said, does that work? And the answer was no. The answer was, our project brings money today to the table and now, and $72 billion in 30 years. That's how we got here. I just want to be clear. This wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. Got all those words mixed up. Knee-jerk reaction to their toll. It was a thought-out process before tolls ever was really talked about in this bill.
On these numbers, Len,
4 years? Oh, that's right, because your daughter's 4 years old. 4 years old. That's what it is. That was the birthday present.
You said these numbers are a cartoon sketch. Take me through this. Are you
Sure.
saying, what is the cartoon sketch? I mean, they're talking about here 3.5 cents a mile, 4.5 cents a mile on the peak period. Are you saying that that's just wrong or it's not doable? What
The reason why it's a cartoon sketch is that nobody knows. And they would admit to you in a private conversation that nobody knows. If you talk to them and say, how did you get this? And here's how you could do it just 30,000 foot level. These are the numbers that Governor Malloy came up with when he told every highway, 9, Route 2, Route 15, Route 8, every major interstate and interstate highway system, told everything. He came up with those numbers. How you got them is in the
numbers per mile, is that what you mean?
numbers per mile. Okay. That came out of the C.D. Smith report. And if you look at C.D. Smith report, they say this is for conversation only. Don't hold these numbers. We don't know if they're right. Now, Governor Lamont says, I'm narrowing it down. I'm not going to do Route 8. Right. I'm not going to do these other highways. So therefore, you're doing less, it's 300 miles, less road you're tolling. How do you end up with the same number? There are less cars.
Well, actually, it's a lesser number when you look at the DOT report from November. But, I mean, that's another issue.
So if it's less cars, the value must go down.
Sure.
And you're coming from a number that you began with that the expert says is not a real number. It is for discussion only. He admitted to you that essentially by not answering your question specifically, he can't commit to these numbers. This is a ruse.
You know, today also we heard 50 gantries. It was 53. Originally it was 82. The measle map isn't a made-up map. We spent millions and millions of dollars in that study to get that map, of which there was a lot of thought and rigor that was put into it. So regardless the number of gantries and regardless the promised discounts to Connecticut residents, the $1 billion gross net revenue never goes away. So you have to ask, sale on what? It's all a myth.
You have the capacity right now, if Republicans come to the table and say, we will consider tolling, but the only way we will consider it is after it goes to the feds and comes back, it will be the final call of the General Assembly. By final call, I mean chapter and verse, pricing, location, etc. My understanding today is there's not a single Republican vote even for that kind of proposal, and Representative Devlin is nodding yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is truth to that right now. But, you know, what's interesting is, so the Republicans are constantly criticized that we don't have a plan when we do have a very detailed, prioritized progress.
But why is that? If
even under that circumstances, because all the questions about uncertainties are well taken.
But getting back to that point, there's still uncertainties, and that is to my point. So they're going to dismiss a Republican plan that has specifics, but their own plan has none. And even if we said we'll send it to the feds for approval, get it back, the legislature approves, there still isn't a plan. And we saw at the beginning of session, the number of highways have been reduced. All of this is fluid. And so it's very difficult to ask anybody responsibly to vote for something like that.
But the feds say by the nature of the process, there must be uncertainty in the enabling legislation because there's a back and forth with what fits their definitions of EPP, what would be allowed. So yeah, there are huge questions. But the bottom line is, I mean, you guys want tolls off the table, and you're saying no.
And we have felt, tolls started under Governor Rell. Her administration had looked at it. And I think to Len's point back in 2009, we didn't believe that was the right solution for the state of Connecticut. That's how we went into the direction of prioritized progress as an alternative. So for us to retreat and even consider tolls, there really hasn't been put anything on the table that makes that a viable option.
But think about the Connecticut taxpayer. We already pay $500 million in gas tax. We pay $330 million in the petroleum gross excise tax. We pay a car tax. New York doesn't have a car tax. Massachusetts doesn't have the petroleum gross earnings tax. And now we're saying, Connecticut resident, on top of all of those user fees, we want you to come out of pocket on day one of an additional $650 million. The maps that have been shown so far, whether it's 53 or 82, it is a flat-out money grab. No state is told at the density that is being proposed for our state.
Paul, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I mean, perhaps, maybe I'm wrong here, and I know we've heard a bit, but maybe if some legislation was passed to enable a tolling plan, you might have a better idea of what that plan might look like, so that, I mean, we hear people say, well, they don't have a plan. They don't have a plan that works. It seems to me that if you pass a tolling bill, you might have a little more detail.
Well, if you pass the tolling bill the way they want to, there's a fait complete.
There's 3 different versions of
Well, I don't know. I think you heard pretty.
Some have come back.
Yeah, but I think you heard pretty clearly from the governor he's going to have one bill, and that bill is going to put it on automatic pilot. That's what he said. Now, I don't know if that means he'll veto any other kind of bill, but he said, no, I like this. We could let the bureaucrats, he said the experts, bureaucrats, determine what the price was, and I'm comfortable with that. Now, if that's the role, then I would say that is very disrespectful to taxpayers of the state of Connecticut. If they have the obligation, if they want to go and do a study and they want to come back and say, we refined the traffic patterns, we looked at the avoidance because we're not tolling Route 8, Route 2, Route 9, here's what we really have as real numbers, and then put a plan, then they're entitled to do that and we can have a fair argument. But they're playing in the shadows, and that's what gives me trouble.
How will this end up? The Dems have said in the past, not really today right in front of you, but they've said they have the votes to do tolls. Do you believe that?
No.
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 Are you predicting that tolls will not happen this session?
I don't know what will happen, but I would think as it stands right now, I think it's dubious.
Okay, but you don't think they have the votes right now?
I believe it's dubious.